Somewhere beneath the streets of Manhattan, sealed behind vault doors that weigh more than a fully loaded Boeing 747, lies a room that almost nobody alive has ever entered. The New York Federal Reserve holds roughly 6,000 tons of gold, more than any other storage facility on the planet, and it sits not in a skyscraper, not in a government bunker, but 5 stories underground, resting on the bedrock of Manhattan Island itself. That number, 6,000 tons, means almost nothing until you realize it exceeds the combined gold reserves of Germany, Italy, and France. And yet, according to geological survey documents quietly filed in the early 1960s, the building goes deeper than anyone has officially admitted. Information from internet sources, links in description. Subscribe. Let's begin. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York was completed in 1924, designed by the architectural firm York & Sawyer to resemble a Florentine Renaissance palazzo, all rusticated stone and iron bars, sitting heavy and immovable on Liberty Street. From the outside, it looks like a fortress pretending to be a bank. The walls at ground level are more than 2.5 meters thick, reinforced in ways that the original blueprints, even the ones released through Freedom of Information requests, describe only in vague structural terms. Imagine walking past it on a Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, while somewhere beneath your feet, under the sidewalk, under the subway tunnels, under the water mains and the fiber optic cables, something is sitting in the dark that nobody is officially talking about. The building's public story is already extraordinary enough to seem fictional. The vault itself, the one the Fed will actually show you on a carefully guided tour, is built inside a 90-ton steel cylinder, itself encased in concrete, itself set into bedrock. The cylinder cannot be drilled through without triggering detection systems. It cannot be blown open without collapsing the surrounding structure. And it does not have a combination lock in the traditional sense. It is sealed by a time-controlled mechanism that cannot be overridden from inside, meaning that if you somehow got in, the vault itself would decide when you got out. Think about that the next time you feel like your bank is being difficult with your PIN number. But the tour ends at a specific level. It always has. The Federal Reserve's official literature describes the gold vault as being on the 5th sublevel, bedrock level, the lowest point of the structure. Every piece of public documentation, every architectural rendering submitted to the city, every press release written in the last 100 years confirms this. 5 levels down, end of story. Except that geological reports from the early 1960s, surveys commissioned not by the Fed itself, but by New York City during preliminary planning for what would eventually become the Water Tunnel No. 3 project, describe something different entirely. Water Tunnel No. 3 is itself one of the most ambitious and least discussed infrastructure projects in American history. It has been under construction in stages since 1970, and it will eventually run 60 miles through the rock beneath New York City, carrying drinking water to millions of people. The survey work that preceded it required detailed geological mapping of Manhattan's bedrock, particularly in Lower Manhattan, where the schist and gneiss formations are dense and ancient, compressed by hundreds of millions of years of geological pressure. City engineers needed to know exactly what was down there before they started boring through it. And in the process of finding out what was down there, they found something unexpected beneath Liberty Street. The documents in question are not classified. That is the strange part. They were filed with the New York City Department of Water Supply, Gas and Electricity, archived and largely forgotten. They are dry reading, full of bore sample identifications, rock density measurements, groundwater tables, and load-bearing calculations written in the language of civil engineering rather than conspiracy. But buried inside the technical language, in a section addressing subsurface anomalies that might affect tunnel routing decisions, surveyors noted the presence of excavated chambers at depths inconsistent with known construction records for buildings in the Liberty Street corridor. The notation is brief. It uses the phrase pre-existing anthropogenic voids, meaning spaces underground that were dug out by human hands, not formed by nature. You have to understand what this means in context. When a geological survey team is boring sample holes and taking measurements, they are not looking for secrets. They are looking for water, for rock density, for fault lines. When they note a pre-existing anthropogenic void in a column of data, they are flagging it as an obstacle, a variable, something the tunnel engineers need to know about to avoid a structural surprise. They are not making an accusation, they are doing their job. And their job, in this case, happened to record the existence of excavated spaces beneath the Federal Reserve Building that extended below the 5th sublevel, described in every public blueprint. Imagine being the engineer who wrote that notation. You are sitting in an office somewhere in Lower Manhattan, reviewing bore sample data from a dozen different sites, and you realize that your numbers do not match the building records for one of the most secure financial institutions in the world. What do you do with that? You write it down in technical language, you route the tunnel a little further east, and you move on. Because your job is not to ask questions about the Federal Reserve. Nobody's job is to ask questions about the Federal Reserve. The specific depth discrepancy is what makes this so difficult to dismiss as a mapping error. The public blueprints place the lowest level of the Fed structure at approximately 15 meters below street level. The geological survey notations reference anthropogenic voids at depths ranging from 24 to 31 meters below the surface in the same grid coordinates. That gap, roughly 9 to 16 meters, is not a rounding error. That is not a calibration difference between two measuring systems. In everyday terms, you are talking about the height of a 4-story building sitting in the rock below a level that is officially supposed to be the bottom of everything. Something was dug out down there, and it was dug out before 1960 because those surveys were capturing what already existed. The Federal Reserve, for its part, has never addressed these documents directly, which is not surprising given that almost nobody outside of civil engineering archives has ever connected them to the building on Liberty Street. The Fed's press office, when contacted by researchers over the years about the vault's specifications, reliably refers journalists to the official tour program and the published fact sheets. 5 levels, bedrock, 90-ton cylinder, end of discussion. The consistency of that answer is itself a kind of answer. Think about it. Institutions that have nothing to hide tend to engage with anomalies rather than simply repeating their prepared statement like a skipping record. What was built down there, and when, and by whom? Those questions do not have clean answers yet. But the context surrounding the building's construction offers some threads worth following. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York broke ground in 1919 and was completed in 1924, but the site had been prepared for years before construction began. The bedrock in that part of Lower Manhattan sits unusually close to the surface compared to Midtown, which is one of the reasons the financial district developed where it did. The rock could support weight without extraordinary foundations. But that same accessible bedrock also meant that deep excavation was technically feasible in the early 20th century in a way it simply was not in other parts of the city. The early 1920s were not a naive time for American finance. The First World War had reshuffled the global monetary order in ways that the public was only dimly aware of. Gold was moving. Enormous quantities of European gold were being transferred to American custody, partly as war debt collateral, partly because the United States was the only major economy whose industrial base had not been shelled into rubble. The Federal Reserve System itself had only been created in 1913, and the New York branch was already positioning itself as the operational center of global dollar diplomacy. People who built that institution were thinking in decades, possibly in generations. They were not building a bank. They were building a mechanism for controlling the financial architecture of the 20th century. Against that backdrop, the idea that the architects and planners of the New York Fed would build exactly as deep as their public permits indicated and then stop, satisfied, incurious, restrained, seems harder to accept than the alternative. These were people who understood that control over gold meant control over governments. They understood that the most valuable asset of any secure facility is not its locks, but its secrecy. And they were operating in an era when construction crews could be compartmentalized, when city officials could be quietly accommodated, and when the general public had neither the tools nor the institutional access to audit what was being dug beneath a private bank on a street in Lower Manhattan. The 1960s geological records do not stand alone either. they intersect with a separate and stranger thread, a set of references in declassified Treasury Department correspondence from the late 1950s that mention, without elaboration, a continuity storage facility associated with Federal Reserve operations in New York. The phrase appears in a memo discussing Cold War emergency planning, specifically the dispersal of critical financial records and hard assets in the event of a nuclear strike on Manhattan. The memo does not name the facility. It refers to it only by a 3-digit numerical code that does not correspond to any publicly known Federal Reserve location, branch number, or operational unit. Researchers who have tried to trace that code through Treasury archives have found that the relevant filing series was transferred to restricted access status sometime in the mid-1980s and has not been reviewed for declassification since. That transfer to restricted status happened quietly, without public announcement, roughly at the same time that the final routing decisions for Water Tunnel Number 3 were being made permanent, decisions that routed the tunnel several blocks further from Liberty Street than the original engineering surveys had suggested was necessary. Whether that is coincidence or coordination, the geological record and the archival record are pointing in the same direction, toward the same address, toward the same question that nobody in any official capacity has ever been asked to answer on the record. What exactly is sitting in the dark beneath the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and how long has it been there? The Cold War context matters more than most people realize when trying to understand what might exist beneath Liberty Street. In the early 1950s, the United States government was engaged in a systematic and largely secret effort to ensure that the financial infrastructure of the country could survive a nuclear attack. This was not paranoia dressed up as policy. It was policy informed by the very real understanding that the Soviet Union had tested its first atomic bomb in 1949, and that American cities, including New York, were on any rational target list. The Federal Reserve, as the institution responsible for maintaining the integrity of the dollar and the flow of credit through the entire economy, was considered critical national infrastructure in the same category as military command centers and communications networks. Declassified documents from the Eisenhower administration, specifically those related to the Federal Civil Defense Administration and its coordination with the Treasury Department, reveal that hardened underground facilities were planned or constructed for dozens of federal institutions during this period. Most of those facilities were built into mountains in Virginia and West Virginia: Raven Rock, Mount Weather, the Greenbrier Bunker beneath a resort hotel in White Sulphur Springs. But New York presented a different problem. You cannot carve a mountain bunker beneath Manhattan. What you can do, if you already have a building sitting on top of accessible bedrock, and you already have reasons to keep construction activity quiet, is go deeper than anyone expects. The timing fits with uncomfortable precision. The Treasury Department memo referencing a continuity storage facility in New York dates to 1957 or 1958, based on the document series it belongs to, according to researchers who examined it before the filing series was restricted. That places it squarely in the middle of the period when federal civil defense planning was at its most intense and its most secretive. Think about what was happening in the world in 1957. Sputnik had just crossed the sky. The intercontinental ballistic missile was no longer theoretical. The window for surviving a nuclear exchange, always narrow, was closing in ways that planners could measure in minutes rather than hours. If you were responsible for preserving the financial continuity of the United States government, and you had access to a building already sitting 5 stories underground in one of the most geologically stable parts of Manhattan, the question is not why you would go deeper. The question is why you would not. The 3 sublevels referenced in the 1960s geological surveys, because the notation does specify 3 distinct void signatures at 3 different depth intervals, not one continuous excavation, would place the lowest point somewhere between 28 and 31 meters below street level. At that depth, you are entirely within the Manhattan Schist Formation, one of the hardest and most pressure-resistant rock types in the northeastern United States. It is the same formation that makes Manhattan capable of supporting skyscrapers that would sink into the ground anywhere else. At 30 meters down, inside that rock, you would be essentially immune to anything short of a direct nuclear detonation. A near miss, even a significant one, would be survivable. The structure around you would flex and hold. Imagine what could be stored down there, and for how long, without anyone above ground ever needing to know. Access is the obvious question, and it is the one that produces the most interesting secondary evidence. A facility at that depth, if it exists, requires ventilation, power, and a way in and out that does not involve walking through the public lobby of the Federal Reserve Bank during business hours. Lower Manhattan has, for well over a century, been threaded with underground passages, service tunnels, and utility corridors that do not appear on any map available to the general public. The original IRT subway construction in the early 1900s left behind connecting passages and abandoned station segments. Con Edison maintained steam and electrical infrastructure underground throughout the financial district, through tunnels that are mapped internally but not publicly disclosed. And the Federal Reserve itself is known to have at least one underground vehicle access point that is not visible from street level, a detail confirmed by security researchers who have analyzed the building's exterior and cross-referenced it with historical construction photographs. A separate access route running through existing utility infrastructure would be functionally invisible. Workers, equipment, and materials moving through a tunnel connected to a steam distribution network or an electrical service corridor would generate no visible surface activity, no unusual truck traffic, no telltale construction noise audible from the street. You would never know it was happening. Think about the city you walk through every day, the sidewalk grates and the steam vents and the unmarked metal doors set into the bases of buildings, and consider how much of what moves through that system you have simply never thought to question. The gold angle cannot be ignored either, even though it leads somewhere more uncomfortable than a simple mystery about architecture. The Federal Reserve's gold vault holds deposits belonging to dozens of foreign governments and central banks, not just the United States. Germany alone stores roughly 1,200 tons of its national gold reserve at the New York Fed, though the Bundesbank spent much of the 2000s quietly repatriating portions of it, a process that took longer and generated more diplomatic friction than a simple inventory transfer between cooperating allies should reasonably require. The Bundesbank's own audit reports from that period noted, with careful bureaucratic language, that some bars required remelting and reassaying upon return, meaning they came back in a different physical form than the documented original deposits. That is not an accusation of theft, but it is the kind of detail that makes you wonder exactly what accounting system governs the contents of a facility that may have more levels than its custodians officially acknowledge. If the sublevels exist, they almost certainly hold more than gold. Gold is heavy, inert, and does not require climate control beyond basic humidity management. What requires the kind of reinforced underground space described by the geological anomalies, sealed, deep, insulated from both surface activity and electromagnetic interference, is information, physical records, the kind of documentation that underlies the entire architecture of global finance, debt instruments, ownership records, treaty obligations, the paperwork that sits beneath international monetary agreements and that, if it vanished, would make certain debts unprovable and certain assets untraceable. In an era before digital storage was reliable, before cloud servers and encrypted databases, the only way to protect that kind of information from both physical destruction and unauthorized access was to put it somewhere that essentially no one could reach. That calculation has not entirely changed in the digital age. The most sensitive financial records in the world are not stored on servers connected to the internet. They are stored on isolated systems, in hardened facilities, accessible only through secure channels. If the Federal Reserve built those chambers in the 1950s for analog records, converting them to hardened digital infrastructure in subsequent decades would be a logical and relatively straightforward evolution. The facility would not become obsolete, it would become more valuable. None of this is provable from the outside, which is precisely the point. The geological surveys are real documents in a real archive. The depth discrepancy is a matter of measurement, not interpretation. The Treasury memo exists or existed before its filing series went into restricted access. The routing anomaly in Water Tunnel Number 3 is a matter of public engineering record. Each of these facts is individually explainable, Together they form a pattern that points consistently in one direction, toward a structure that was deliberately built to be unknown, that has been quietly protected from scrutiny across multiple decades and multiple administrations, and that sits right now, in the dark, beneath one of the most surveilled and documented cities on Earth. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York gives tours. They will show you the vault. They will let you hold a gold bar through a slot in the door and tell you it weighs about 27 pounds, about the same as a large bag of dog food. They will explain the locking mechanism and the security procedures with practiced, cheerful confidence. What they will not do is take you to the elevator and press a button for a sublevel that is not on the panel. What they will not do is answer a question that nobody, in any official setting, has ever actually asked them on the record. And that silence, maintained so consistently for so long across so many different people and so many different administrations, is the most revealing thing about this story. Because institutions do not protect secrets they do not have. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.